Hola amigos y familias, hello friends and family. I have a special surprise for you, and this one's going to be in English. It's a book reading about one of my favorite childhood characters, Curious George. Él se llama Jorge el Curioso. Y yo voy a leer el libro a ustedes en inglés. I'm going to read this book to you in English. And little Curious George can come along for the ride. And the story is called Curious George Goes Camping. And I'm going to read this to you because one of my all-time favorite summer activities is going camping. I used to go camping growing up and I absolutely loved it. Maybe you can tell me what you love to do in the summer. Entonces, Curious George Goes Camping. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very, very curious. This weekend, George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, had special plans. They were going camping. Have you ever been camping? At the campsite, the man with the yellow hat unpacked their gear while George looked at all the tents. He saw tents for the big families and one just the right size for a puppy. There were even tents on wheels. Would you like to help me put up our tent, George? The man asked. George was happy to help. It would not be hard to set up a tent, he thought. But it wasn't easy. George, why don't you fill our bucket with water and the pump? His friend suggested. We'll need it by our campfire later when we roast marshmallows. Marshmallows. Georgie loved marshmallows. He couldn't wait to try them roasted. Have you ever had a roast marshmallow? Now, don't wander off and get into trouble, the man warned. But George did not hear him. He was already gone. Because that little Georgie was so curious. I wonder where he's going. At the pump, George worked the handle up and down. Soon his bucket was full. On the way back down the trail, he saw a family packing up. George watched a girl pour her bucket of water on a campfire. The fire sizzled out. George thought, that looked like fun. Whoa, I wonder what George is going to do. He poured his bucket of water on the next campfire. There he goes. Hey, yelled the camper. We weren't finished with that yet. The camper began to chase George, but George didn't mean to cause trouble. Now he only wanted to hide. He ran into the forest as fast as he could, but the camper's footsteps followed close behind. George ran faster and faster. The footsteps came closer and closer until suddenly... What's gonna happen? They were passing George. Why, it was not the camper chasing George now. It was a deer. What fun to run with a deer. Forgetting all about the camper and the marshmallows, George ran after the deer. But a little monkey cannot run as fast as the deer in the woods. Before long, George was lost and all alone. He felt very tired, and he stopped to rest. At first, he was worried. He was very far from the camp. But there were lots of other animals to keep him company. He saw a lizard sunning on a rock and a squirrel chattering in the tree when he saw the tail of a black and white kitty peeking out from under a bush. He was curious. That little Georgie is so curious. Would the kitty like to play with George? George gently pulled the kitty out. Oh my goodness. What do you think that tail is gonna do? What is that kitty gonna do? But it was not a kitty. It was a skunk, and it was scared. And the skunk lifted its tail and sprayed. Whew! The spray smelled awful. The animals tried to get away. George wanted to get away too, but he could not. The smell was all over him. Have you ever seen a skunk? That's a skunk, and they spray to mark their territory. How would he ever get rid of this awful smell, he wondered. Too bad he could not take a bath in the woods. And there are all the animals. Then George had an idea. He could wash the smell off in the creek. George jumped into the cold water. He splashed about and scrubbed, but he was still smelly, and now he was wet, too. But what could he do? George thought and thought. If he climbed up the tree to dry off, would the smell blow away? No, even dry and high up in the tree, George did not smell better. Poor George. He wished he hadn't wandered so far from the camp. He wished he were roasting marshmallows with his friend. Suddenly, George heard footsteps heading toward him. Someone was coming. Who's it gonna be? It was the forest animals, but they ran right by him. They had seen something scary, and George saw it too. It was a fire. Oh my goodness, look at all that smoke burning from the fire. Do you see that smoke? George had gotten into trouble for putting out the one fire, but this fire wasn't even in the campground. This was an emergency. Quickly, George climbed down the tree and grabbed his bucket. He scooped it full of water in the creek. Then, being careful not to spill, he climbed back up and swung from the branch through the trees. When George got close enough to the fire, he reached down and poured the water on the flames. Out went the fire with a big hiss sound. Just then, George's friend rushed out of the forest with the ranger. "George," he called, I was afraid you would be here." "It's a good thing you were here, George," the ranger said. "We saw smoke from the campground, but you put this fire out just in time." George was glad to help, and the man with the yellow hat was glad to see that George was safe. But he had a funny look on his face. "George," he asked, "what is that smell?" What is little Georgie gonna say? Back at the campsite, George's friend helped him get rid of that awful smell. After a strange bath in tomato juice, George felt fine. Then the man with the yellow hat invited the ranger to cook with them over their own small campfire. "Fires can be nice, if you're careful," said the ranger. George agreed, especially for roasting marshmallows. Have you ever roasted marshmallows? Roasting marshmallows is one of our family's favorite things to do. Maybe you can roast marshmallows with friends or family or someone in your house, but you need to do it in a safe way. I love camping and I love Curious George. Did you like Curious George? Little Georgie says, "Adios, amigos. Nos vemos luego. See you later."